Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're incredibly glad you could join us today because we are looking at something massive.
Yeah, a sweeping, really complex global event that is literally unfolding as we speak.
Exactly. We are analyzing the March 2026 military conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran.
Right.
And our mission today is to help you cut through all that chaotic breaking news cycle.
Which is overwhelming right now.
It really is.
Oh.
So we want to give you a clear, comprehensive understanding of the timeline, the strategy, and honestly, how this is going to impact everything from global supply chains to the price of your next grocery run.
Yeah, and to get you the clearest picture possible, we've synthesized a really diverse stack of sources for this one.
What are we looking at today?
So we're pulling from live Wikipedia updates tracking the military movements, geopolitical analysis from the Atlantic Council and the Institute for the Study of War, plus on-the-ground reporting from The Guardian, The National, and Xinhua. And we're also examining this highly confidential corporate crisis directive.
I found that part fascinating.
Oh, it's incredible. It's from the international law firm Wasl and Wasl. It gives us this rare, behind-the-scenes look at how Fortune 500 companies are desperately trying to navigate the fallout.
Yeah. But one really quick note before we get into the actual timeline. The
What?
sources we are pulling from today contain incredibly charged perspectives.
Very much so.
We're analyzing documents that range from explicit calls for regime change by the U.S. administration to really harsh Iranian condemnations of Western military action.
Right, and we need to be clear about our role here.
Exactly. We are acting strictly as your impartial guides. We are not taking a political stance, we're not endorsing any military actions, or aligning with any ideological viewpoints from the left or the right.
None of that.
Our objective is simply to look at the raw data, convey the factual timeline, and examine the strategic realities exactly as they're presented in the source material.
Yeah, that objective neutrality is crucial. I mean, understanding the mechanics of a global crisis requires you to strip away the rhetoric. You have to evaluate the strategic realities on the ground.
Right.
Knowledge is just most valuable when it's understood and applied critically, especially when we're dealing with this level of geopolitical volatility.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start on the morning of February 28, 2026. Because the initiation of this conflict, it broke several major conventions of modern warfare.
It really did.
The Guardian reported this very specific, honestly chilling detail about the initial bombardment. The bombs started falling on Tehran in full daylight.
Yeah.
It was roughly 9:15 a.m.
Which is unheard of.
Right. The streets were packed with commuters. The commercial districts were fully active. When you track modern air campaigns, military doctrine almost always dictates night operations.
Exactly. You go in at night to degrade anti-aircraft capabilities and conceal your aircraft movements.
But striking the capital at 9:15 a.m. in broad daylight, that isn't just a tactical choice. That sends a deliberate message.
What's fascinating here is the psychological weight of that intentionality. I mean, by operating in broad daylight, U.S. and Israeli forces were demonstrating absolute, uncontested air superiority.
Just showing they could do whatever they wanted.
Right. They were essentially proving that highly advanced Russian-supplied air defense systems, which Iran relies heavily upon, they couldn't track or intercept the incoming assets, even at peak visibility.
Wow.
It communicates to the Iranian military apparatus that they are entirely exposed, and simultaneously it delivers a profound shock to the civilian populace who are just watching the airspace being dominated in real time.
And the scope of the operation just reinforces that message of dominance. The U.S. Department of Defense dubbed their campaign Operation Epic Fury.
And Israeli forces executed Operation Roaring Lion.
Right. In the first 12 hours alone, we are looking at nearly 900 individual strikes.
900 in 12 hours.
It's staggering. They systematically dismantled Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps bases.
Yeah.
They leveled the Amman missile base in the north and obliterated the Kimia Partsavan drone factory.
And hitting that drone factory is huge. Taking out those production facilities does much more than just stop an immediate counterattack.
What does it do?
It effectively guts Iran's modern export economy. You have to consider how heavily they've relied on supplying unmanned aerial vehicles to Russia and various regional proxy groups over the last few years.
So it's an economic hit as much as a military one.
Exactly. The targeting strategy reveals three simultaneous lines of effort. The coalition was suppressing air defenses to clear corridors, degrading immediate retaliatory capabilities by hitting missile silos,
Right.
and fracturing their command and control infrastructure. They wanted to sever the central nervous system of the military before a coordinated defense could even be mounted.
And they struck the absolute center of that nervous system.
Hmm.
I mean, the most monumental consequence of those first few hours was the decapitation strike.
Yeah, this changed everything.
Coalition forces assassinated Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, inside his Tehran compound. And the blast also reportedly killed his daughter, his son-in-law, his granddaughter, and his daughter-in-law, alongside approximately 40 top Iranian officials.
Including Major General Mohammad Pakpour, the commander of the IRGC ground forces.
Exactly. The entire apex of the Iranian command structure was removed in a single morning.
The structural implications of Khamenei's death are just profound. I mean, he had held absolute power since 1989.
Over 30 years.
Right. He was the ultimate architect of modern Iran's strategic and ideological posture. Removing a figurehead of that magnitude, along with the top tier of the military apparatus, it creates an immediate catastrophic vacuum in leadership.
Right in the middle of an existential state crisis.
Exactly. But evaluating this operation also requires us to look at the devastating realities of the kinetic operations themselves. When we talk about kinetic operations, meaning the deployment of active, lethal military force, there is no such thing as a perfectly surgical strike.
No matter how good the precision-guided munitions are.
Exactly.
And the sources outline a horrific civilian toll that illustrates that exact point. An airstrike hit a girls' elementary school in Minab, located in southern Iran. Reports indicate that over 100 people, predominantly children, were killed in the blast.
It's awful. And the fog of war and the proximity of military installations to civilian infrastructure, it inevitably results in devastating collateral damage.
Yeah.
This specific tragedy at the Minab school is already generating significant international humanitarian blowback. It complicates the diplomatic narrative for the coalition.
I would imagine so.
And it raises an important question about the proportionality of the campaign, as well as the long-term regional resentment it will inevitably foster.
It really forces you to look backward and ask how the geopolitical landscape deteriorated to this boiling point so rapidly, because just weeks prior to these strikes, the U.S. and Iran were engaged in indirect nuclear talks in Oman and Geneva. The Omani foreign minister was publicly stating that a diplomatic deal was within reach. Transitioning from active diplomatic channels in Geneva to a total decapitation strike in Tehran requires a massive strategic pivot.
It does. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look away from the nuclear silos for a second and focus directly on the domestic rot inside Iran.
The internal issues.
Yeah. The state was incredibly fragile, driven by a complete economic implosion. To really understand the timing of the strike, you have to examine the October 2025 collapse of Ayanda Bank.
Yes. The Atlantic Council report provided a really deep dive into that specific collapse. Ayanda Bank was not a standard commercial retail bank.
Not at all.
It was deeply intertwined with regime elites and IRGC financing. The institution failed due to systemic internal corruption and financing lavish, non-performing real estate projects.
Right, they were building massive luxury malls that went nowhere.
Exactly. And when it collapsed, the Iranian central bank stepped in to absorb the toxic debt to prevent a total financial panic. But the mechanism they used to cover that debt was simply printing massive amounts of rizzles.
They just turned on the printers.
Yeah. They flooded the economy with new currency, which instantly devalued the money already in circulation and triggered a massive hyperinflation crisis. By late 2025, inflation had soared past 48%.
Which is unsustainable. When a government hyperinflates its currency to protect the investments of its elite class, the social contract disintegrates.
People can't afford to live.
Basic staples become unaffordable. The working class is pushed into extreme poverty. That specific economic ruin was the direct catalyst for the massive nationwide protests that erupted in late 2025 and January of 2026.
Citizens from every demographic poured into the streets, from the traditional bazaars in Tehran to university campuses across the country, all demanding an end to the regime.
And the regime's response to those protests was catastrophic.
Yeah, our sources referred to this period as the January massacres. The state deployed the Basij, their volunteer paramilitary enforcer units, alongside the IRGC to violently repress the demonstrations.
They cracked down hard.
The ensuing crackdown resulted in thousands, and by some estimates tens of thousands, of civilian deaths. The sheer scale of the violence left the Iranian public deeply alienated and traumatized by their own government.
So, intelligence assessments in Washington and Jerusalem recognized that dynamic as a historic strategic window.
They saw the weakness.
They observed a regime hanging by a thread. You had an elite class fractured by financial corruption, an economy in free fall, and a populace that was actively hostile toward its leaders.
Right.
The coalition realized that merely containing the nuclear program through diplomacy in Oman was a half measure. They believed they had a fleeting opportunity to push the entire weakened structure over the edge and achieve total regime change from the outside.
But the regime, despite all that, retained enough operational capacity to retaliate aggressively. The geographical scope of Iran's response, which they dubbed Operation True Promise 4, is staggering. It is. Historically, Iran has relied on its axis of resistance proxy groups, like Hezbollah and Hamas, to conduct asymmetric warfare and maintain plausible deniability.
Right, they usually use middlemen.
But because those proxy networks had been severely degraded in previous regional conflicts, Iran was forced to launch hundreds of ballistic missiles and suicide drones directly from their own sovereign territory across the Persian Gulf.
And firing directly from Iranian territory into neighboring sovereign nations represents a fundamental shift in their military doctrine.
That's huge escalation.
They discarded the proxy shield and crossed a massive geopolitical Rubicon. They directly implicated the state in acts of war against multiple regional actors simultaneously.
And the target list reads like an intentional effort to destabilize the entire global economy. An Iranian drone crashed directly into the iconic Burj Al Arab and the Fairmont Hotel in Dubai. They executed a deadly strike in Abu Dhabi. They targeted and damaged the runway at the Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait.
Wow.
They launched strikes near the U.S. consulate in Erbil, Iraq, and fired on assets in Bahrain and Qatar. They're intentionally lighting up the entire Gulf region.
The strategy is to widen the theater of war as broadly as possible. By pulling the Gulf Cooperation Council states the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain into the line of fire, Iran is distributing the financial and infrastructural costs of the conflict.
Making everyone pay for it.
Yes. They're attempting to create such severe regional instability and threaten so much critical global infrastructure that the international community panics and forces the coalition to implement an immediate ceasefire.
But the coalition anticipated that retaliation and initiated a sweeping digital offensive to blunt it. The Jerusalem Post reported that simultaneously with the physical bombings, Israel conducted what is being called the largest cyber attack in human history against Iran.
It was massive.
They throttled Iran's internet connectivity down to just 4% of its normal traffic, creating a near-total digital blackout. And while they had the national network hijacked, they began broadcasting anti-regime messages on state-linked websites.
That is the definition of a modern combined arms campaign. They synchronized cyber, psychological, and physical warfare to hit at the exact same millisecond.
Right.
By severing the internet, the coalition prevents the Iranian military from communicating target coordinates. But simultaneously, they prevent the internal security forces like the Basij from coordinating movements to suppress any potential domestic uprisings.
So they blinded the state apparatus while actively feeding propaganda to the populace to encourage the regime change they're fighting for.
Exactly.
While the cyber blackout blinded the regime militarily, it also instantly severed global financial communications. Which brings us to a completely different battlefield. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this is where it hits home for a lot of people.
We need to examine that corporate crisis directive from the law firm Wazel and Wazel. This document was distributed to Fortune 500 C-suites, general counsels, and corporate boards, and it details the absolute panic rippling through the global commercial ecosystem.
The directive highlights the weaponization of the global economy. I mean, the physical destruction of military bases is only one layer of this conflict. The legal and financial fallout is actively threatening to fracture global supply chains entirely, placing multinational corporations in an impossible legal bind.
And the mechanism driving that corporate panic is Donald Trump's February 6, 2026 executive order under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA.
Right.
The order threatens a crippling 25% tariff on goods imported from any sovereign nation that directly or indirectly acquires goods from Iran.
Let's translate what a secondary sanction actually means for you.
Yeah, please.
If you are buying a new laptop next month and the European manufacturer used a microchip from an Asian supplier who unknowingly sourced trace raw materials linked to an Iranian mining operation,
Okay.
that laptop gets slapped with a 25% tariff at the U.S. border.
Just because of a trace mineral deep in the supply chain.
Exactly. That transforms the standard U.S. tariff schedule into a draconian secondary sanction. It essentially forces every multinational corporation on the planet to act as a forensic intelligence agency.
They have to investigate themselves.
Right. Companies are now required to conduct deep, exhaustive audits of their entire supply chain, multiple tiers down, to prove a negative. It's an aggressive form of economic statecraft designed to completely isolate the Iranian economy, but the collateral friction it introduces to global trade is immense.
And the friction on physical global trade is even more immediate. The IRGC officially declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, issuing a statement warning that no ship is allowed to pass.
Which is huge.
When you consider that roughly 20% of the world's daily oil consumption flows through that narrow waterway, the stakes become incredibly clear.
The Strait of Hormuz is the central nervous system of global energy logistics. Severing that artery creates instantaneous and severe ripple effects across every sector of the global economy, directly impacting manufacturing, shipping, and consumer pricing.
Energy analysts from Vanda Insights and Lombard Odier are already monitoring the fallout. They project that Brent crude will see an immediate, knee-jerk jump to $80 a barrel the moment markets open.
And that's just the start.
Right. If the disruption in the strait turns into a prolonged blockade, there's a very real potential for oil to soar to $100 a barrel. That kind of energy shock drives up global inflation instantly. You will feel the impact of that blockade every time you fill up your gas tank or pay for groceries that rely on diesel-fueled supply chains to reach the supermarket.
And while the macroeconomic indicators flash red, corporations are dealing with an acute human capital crisis on the ground.
Their employee.
Right. The Wassel and Wassel Directive emphasizes that the foremost priority for these companies is the preservation of human life. Multinational corporations are desperately executing contingency plans to evacuate their expatriate labor, specialized engineers, and executive staff out of the Middle East.
And the legal maneuvers they're using to execute those evacuations are fascinating. The directive details corporate lawyers invoking the Brantley Doctrine.
Yeah, this is wild.
Originally, this was a niche legal mechanism utilized in professional sports contracts. It allowed a player to break a rigid, fixed-term agreement under extreme, extenuating circumstances.
Right.
Now, corporate legal teams are repurposing sports law jurisprudence to legally extract their highly skilled personnel from an active war zone without breaching local Middle Eastern employment contracts.
The reliance on the Brantley Doctrine illustrates the unprecedented stress placed on the legal foundation of global commerce. Companies are discovering that standard force majeure clauses the act of God, provisions in contracts designed to excuse performance during a war or natural disaster. They're failing to protect them.
They just aren't broad enough.
Right. The sheer complex scale of this specific supply chain fracture, combined with the secondary sanctions, creates legal loopholes that trap companies in liability. Traditional legal defenses are simply crumbling under the weight of this conflict.
Which brings us back to the ground in Iran, where the chaos is intensely personal and deeply fragmented. The reporting from March Feast 2026 describes a nation completely split in two. You have thousands of citizens flooding the streets of Tehran, dressed in black, actively mourning the assassination of Khamenei and chanting "Death to America."
Yet, simultaneously, the data reveals a completely contrasting reality playing out in adjacent neighborhoods and across different cities.
The Telegraph and Iran International captured footage of Iranians cheering from their rooftops.
Which is incredible to see.
People are blowing whistles, letting out ululations, and actively celebrating the death of the Supreme Leader. You have university students chanting "Death to the Dictator" while the airspace above them is contested.
It's a society reacting to the exact same geopolitical event, with intense, paralyzing grief on one hand and overwhelming defiant joy on the other.
And sitting atop that deeply divided society is a massive constitutional vacuum.
Right. The structure of the Islamic Republic was designed with continuity protocols, but an assassination of this specific magnitude tests the system beyond its design limits.
So who is even in charge?
Well, under the Iranian constitution, President Pezeshkian, Judiciary Chief EJ, and a member of the Guardian Council have formed a temporary council to manage the state. but they're attempting to govern a fractured public while under massive aerial bombardment with a decapitated military leadership structure.
The future of the Islamic Republic is entirely dangerously uncertain.
It really is.
So what does this all mean? We've examined the military execution, the historical economic pretext, the global supply chain panic, and the divided Iranian public. Where does this leave the international community?
I want to leave you with a sobering insight drawn from the Center for Strategic and International Studies report. The primary strategic justification for the coalition's strikes was to prevent nuclear proliferation. They wanted to definitively stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon.
Right, that was the core goal.
However, by destroying the central command structure of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, they may have achieved the exact opposite of their intended goal.
Wait.
Well, Iran still possesses roughly 400 kilograms of 60% highly enriched uranium, and the exact location of that material is currently unaccounted for.
The implications of losing track of that material are terrifying.
By shattering the state apparatus, the coalition may have scattered Iran's highly specialized, deeply knowledgeable nuclear scientists to the wind.
Oh, wow.
Without a central functional government to monitor their movements or pay their salaries, these newly unaccountable scientists, along with stockpiles of nearly weapons-grade uranium, could easily fall into the hands of non-state actors, terrorist organizations, or outside nations looking to purchase a nuclear program off the shelf.
So they essentially decentralized the danger.
Yes. In their attempt to neutralize a centralized state-level nuclear threat, the coalition may have inadvertently created a dozen decentralized, untraceable nuclear threats across the globe.
That is the deeply provocative thought to end on, but it highlights just how complex the unintended consequences of this conflict truly are. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive today.
Thanks for listening.
We know the material is heavy, but understanding the intricate mechanics behind the headlines is the most effective way to navigate this incredibly volatile moment in history. Keep questioning the narratives you read, keep analyzing the bigger picture, and we promise to be back with another stack of sources soon. Take care.